morning, campers. How the devil are you? My normal little jaunt day today by the river, and today I wanted to try and combine two topics and see if we can find a link between them. Obviously I've already thought about it. The two topics for today are the Seaside and HP sauce. Do you think I can do it? Let's try. Okay, so I'm going to start with something that's been on my mind quite a lot recently, and I think it's because as I'm looking at my computer and it goes into that sleep mode that we talked about before, and then it starts cycling through all the photos on your hard drive. It's been quite interesting. Going back to one of the videos that I made about looking back through childhood photos and actually noticing the difference in my demeanour, in my facial expression between the ages of about 6 and 7 perhaps. That was kind of the cusp of the age that I was, where you can see a completely different change in family photos, you know, on holidays and things like that, from a happy, cheerful young child to someone that was morose and miserable and sullen all the time. And I'll put a link to that video down below if you want to watch it. But it's quite interesting, you know, that point in my childhood at which I realised that, you know, it was going to be a bit of a slog living with my father in the same box as him. And another thing that it starts you thinking about is obviously the death of my dad in January, a couple of months ago now, and it does make you think about a lot of things to do with your life and how things are going and how things went and all that sort of contemplative stuff. My dad and my mum wanted to, supposedly my mum and dad wanted to be, when they had both gone, for their ashes to be stored and then deposited in the one particular place. And you can see this where this immediately links in to my first topic of the day, the Seaside. There's a town in Norfolk, on the coastal town called Cromer, in the south-east-ish of England, the east coast anyway. It's a lovely place, lovely fishing village or town, and there's a pier there with a RNLI, Royal National Lifeboat Association or Institute, rescue boats, you know, at the end of the pier, and apparently my mum and dad have spent quite a few little mini holidays and breaks there. So my dad told us that that's where he and mum wanted their ashes to be scattered into the ocean there, because they remember it so fondly. I don't think that's going to actually happen, and if you read between the lines from some of my other videos, you'll probably realise why. And in the end, we're going to probably take my dad, now that he's gone, and when we're allowed to collect the ashes, we will be taking them to a nearby forest where, you know, he spent quite a few happy times, walks, taking the dog and stuff like that. So there you go, that's the first thing. And at exactly that point, the sun came out and blared at me, as you can see from it shining in my eyes and on my silvery locks, and I had to do a little mini striptease next to the river. So yeah, the first topic was my dad, and the Seaside. That's where it links to the Seaside. Now the other thing is, that started me thinking, because my mum and my brother went to see him in the Chapel of Rest, and obviously it's not a very pleasant experience for anyone. You know, it's your opportunity to say your last goodbyes. So lots of people feel almost obliged to do it, or like they want to have those last few words with the deceased, especially if it's a loved one. You can understand why people want to do it, but of course you are seeing that person's body for the very last time ever. It's a weird experience. Thankfully I've only had to do it once, but yeah, when you, I mean the morticians, is that the right word? The mortuary people, or the undertakers, often do their best to try and make the experiences stress-free as possible. And despite the fact that the people that prepare the bodies do a fantastic job, you know, sometimes with terrible starting points. You know, if this person's been in a terrible accident or something like that, they've got a hell of a job on their hands to try and make that person presentable for the last few relatives to say their goodbyes. Thankfully, in my dad's case, there wasn't really that much difference. Apparently he was still recognisable, but because he'd been in a nursing home for the last few weeks or months of his life, he'd lost a terrible amount of weight. He had a swallowing problem, as you know, and he was really struggling to eat and drink in the last few weeks. So he was shriveled, you know, a shriveled version of what he used to be. Yeah, it's a difficult job, and my hat goes off to those people that do that job. It must be awful sometimes. I don't think I could do it, even with a person that just died naturally. I don't think I could do that, certainly not. But yeah, difficult for the people saying goodbye, and how do you choose the last words that you ever say to someone, you know? It ties back into my regrets video, where I'm talking about, you know, worrying about the last things that you say to someone, whether it's a minute ago that they died or 10 years, you know. However, think about that for a minute. The reason that we say goodbye to that person is because the organic matter that makes up their body is no longer functioning as a living unit, right? So what do we do? Well, the traditional thing over the last few hundreds or thousands of years, is that we would bury people. Obviously the population now on Earth is getting so big that perhaps it might be difficult to bury everyone in their own individual grave. You know, 1,000 years from now there might not be much space left if we did that. Although of course the traditional answer to that is just to bury more people on top of old people, or to just after a certain amount of time say, sod it, you know, this ground is fresh now. So we seem to when we bury someone, we seem to want to cling on to the memory of that person and how they affected us in our lives, and remember them for what they did and what they achieved and the life that they had, and bury them a certain distance under the ground so that it's hygienic and everything, and they're not disturbed, and then put a stone there with their name and just a brief summary of their life. And similarly, when we as we do more regularly these days, cremate someone, and then usually we keep the ashes, and the ashes are then it takes up a lot less room. It's a hygienic way of doing it, and you still have something then to bury or distribute in a place of your choice or the person's choice, so that you can go there and remember them, or plant a tree, or whatever it is you decide to do. Essentially though, after that person's gone, in our heads we still have maybe that token place that we can go to where we can remember them, but essentially we think of them as gone. My dad has gone, He's no longer a living being on this planet. But the bones and the skin and the hair that made up his body, although it might have been incinerated, the atoms are still there somewhere. The atoms and the molecules that made that up in the burning process, then some of it's going to be released into the atmosphere, and some of it is going to be the residue that we then have as the ashes that we go and scatter in a place of our or their choosing. And if you're buried, obviously, then the process just takes longer. Your flesh will disappear after a few weeks or a few months, maybe even a few years, you know, depending on the environment that you're buried in. If you die on top of Everest, for example, I'm sure it's going to be a year before you've completely gone. But, you know, generally speaking, the flesh is gone after a few weeks and months. The bones maybe take longer or maybe never disappear, again depending on the situation, the environment, the soil, the temperature, the acidity, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, the elements, atoms, molecules, the things that made you a human being, a person, a living animal on the planet, are still there somewhere. Even if they're dissipated and separated, they still exist. You know, they don't just disappear. I mean, we could get onto the whole subject of some people think that you have a soul and that your soul doesn't die, and there's an afterlife, and there's, you know, different religions and different beliefs have different ways of looking at what happens when a human being dies, or an animal even, that for that case dies, or a plant, or anything living on the planet Earth when it dies. You know, there's lots of different ways of looking at it, but essentially, biologically, the atoms are still there, and that's because we're organic. You know, it's natural. It's the cycle of life. You know, eventually we become something else. We might become a plant, or we might, you know, that plant might be eaten by another animal, and then we become part of that other animal. So it's an interesting topic, and perhaps one that I'll explore in a future video. But the reason that I'm talking about it today is because although our time on this planet as intelligent beings might be finite, we are still here. And that got me thinking as the photos were flipping around on my computer, and childhood photos were coming up, and there was one of me and my brother in the garden. I think I must have been about 3 and my brother was about 1, and nice sunny day in the garden. And what did I see in the picture? A plastic rideable toy with wheels in the shape of an HP sauce bottle. Now, if you're not from the UK, HP sauce, Houses of Parliament sauce, is the go-to brown sauce if you're having sauce on your chips or egg or sausages or whatever you want to call it. It's a fruity brown sauce with a hint of spice to it. So it's a HP sauce bottle, familiar shape and label, but actually made into a plastic toy. And when you look back at old photos, what do you think to yourself? Do you think, oh, I remember that top, I remember those shoes, I remember that toy, I remember those curtains that we had? They're all gone now. You know, all of those things are gone. I don't know where they went. They may be been put in the bin or given to somebody else, or recycled or whatever. They're still here. All of those things, all of those memories in those photos, all of those objects are still here with us on the planet. Isn't that a weird thought? That HP sauce plastic rideable toy is still here somewhere on this planet. Where the hell is it? Does it still look like it did? It's plastic, right? We talked about in another video how plastic takes eons to naturally decompose and go somewhere, not like a human body. So, you know, where is it now? What does it look like? Has it completely gone? And needless to say, the atoms, the molecules, the elements that made that plastic toy are still here somewhere. And to me, that's baffling, that thought. And that's plastic. What about that ring that you lost? Or that watch that you lost? Or that gadget, that camera or something, that phone that you never found? They're all here somewhere. Of course, the sad likelihood is that that plastic container that contained the chicken legs that you cooked 10, 15 years ago is probably washed up on some beach, on some idyllic desert island in the Philippines. That's where that container is now. That gold ring that you lost and you thought it had gone down a drain or something is probably on somebody else's finger. And your father's ashes, which you scattered at sea because that was his favourite place to be, then got swallowed by a little fish that then got swallowed by a tuna, which is now in the sandwich that you're eating with salad and mayonnaise.